Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Mind Muscle Connection podcast. Today is a solo episode and I have a topic I want to dive into. But first, before I do that, I just want to go over, I have my free body recomp checklist. And so within that, I go over 10 things you need for a body recomp, why focusing on body composition is important, two types of body recomp, and everything else you need to know about a body recomp in that free checklist there. So make sure you go check that out. The link to that is in the show notes. So with that out of the way, here is today's topic. I want to talk about cardio and fat loss. So I've changed my mind on this and I want to go over why, and then I want to talk about how to maximize cardio in a fat loss phase there. So for me, for the longest time, I fell into the camp of we don't need to do cardio during fat loss, right? It's just going to slow it down. It's going to slow your metabolism and it's going to cause muscle loss, especially in a fat loss phase. I just told people, hey, just do your steps, right? That's the most important thing. You just get your movement in, you're good to go. That's all you need. You don't need to do any cardio or anything. But going through this myself, and as I've learned more and more about doing some sort of conditioning and cardio, I've changed my mind on it. And I think it can actually be super beneficial if we do it right, though. That's going to be the key thing here is making sure we do it correctly. The most important thing here. So why do we want to do it? One, it improves your cardiovascular system, your cardiovascular health, your cardiovascular system. Duh. We know that's the case. But what does that mean? How's that going to show up for you specifically in a fat loss phase? Your body's going to be more resilient to stress. So the better our conditioning is, the better our cardiovascular fitness is, we are increasing our stress resilience. And so how this can translate to a deficit is your body can handle a deficit better and just life stress. So, if somebody has poor conditioning, cardiovascular health, you may find that they don't recover as well from things. Every stressor that they have just impacts their body more. And so their body is in more of this protective state versus being in a state where it's willing to adapt and actually change. We're able to basically do things to where if you have a day where maybe you have some food that's off plan or whatever, it's like your body's going to not be thrown off as much by that, right? And then again, if you have life stress that comes up, maybe something stressful happened to you, you lost your job, whatever it may be, it's like you can handle those things better because you're in better cardiovascular shape. And for a lot of people, these life stressors, things that pop up, they can be very demanding on the body and they can cause people to want to go out of a deficit, right? Whether subconsciously or consciously, you may find that hunger ramps up. You just may find that your willpower is super low. Therefore, you make worse choices and you just feel like you want to give up. Whereas if we can have better conditioning, we're going to be less likely to go and do that. So that's benefit number one here of this. Next, your body's going to get better at using fat as fuel, which is going to lead to a better body composition. There's this concept of metabolic flexibility. And if we're always using carbohydrates as energy, we may find that our body's not as good at using fat as fuel. And therefore, that could impact your body composition and how lean you can get. And again, how easy it is for you to get into a deficit and stay into that deficit, right? Because again, if we're not good at using fat as a fuel, you may find that you get super hungry when you're not constantly eating. You may find that you crash when you have carbohydrates, right? And again, these things can lead to it being tougher to stick to a calorie deficit. And your body's just, from a body comp standpoint, it is going to impact your body composition, right? Better cardiovascular fitness and doing cardio is going to help with that. And then you can recover better and faster, which is going to lead to better quality training, right? And so we're going to be more likely to maintain muscle and even build muscle potentially because our training is much better than it would be if we're not recovered, we're not recovering as good and everything like that. Number two, though, it's a great calorie funnel. So obviously, the more cardio you do, the more conditioning you do, it's going to increase how many calories you burn in a day because you're just doing more, you're expending more energy, right? So what this means is one, you could potentially create a larger deficit, or you're going to be able to eat more calories and still create a deficit. And that's going to lead to you actually being able to lose fat because we need to be into that deficit. Whereas we're just expending more energy, which again is going to allow us to be more likely to get into that deficit there. And potentially we could also bring up our calories and say, if you don't do any cardio, you need 1,800 calories to lose body fat. If we add in cardio, we're expending more energy. Now maybe we can bump it up to 2,100 and we still have the same deficit from that. And higher energy flux has been shown to be better for body comp than like a low output plus low calories as well, right? So high energy flux being more movement, more exercise in general. But with that, you obviously have to adjust calories to that. But when we are less active, like we have less movement, therefore we have to be on less calories to create that deficit. And from a body comp standpoint, that higher energy flux tends to be better from a body composition standpoint. And again, you get more flexibility from a nutrition standpoint, which is awesome there. So we're going to burn more calories in general, which is going to be helpful from that standpoint. And then it is a more time efficient way to increase activity over steps. Obviously, if you're doing steps can be very time consuming, whereas if we add in some conditioning that's a little bit higher intensity, you're able to expend more energy in a shorter amount of time, which is always again, from a time efficiency standpoint is great versus, hey, you're at 10,000 steps. That's already 45 to 60 minutes plus of movement that you have to get. Now we need to ramp it up to 15,000. And again, that's another 35 to 45 minutes. That's just a lot of time that people will have to commit to that. So this can be a more time efficient way with that. So those are really the two main reasons why we would want to add that in. And both of these are going to lead to a higher likelihood of you getting into a deficit and having better body composition in that deficit as well, which ultimately is what we're trying to do when we are in a calorie deficit. So how to maximize cardio in a fat loss phase. So this is the big mistake I see people make. They do this, but they don't apply cardio in the right way. Typically, cardio is just going to be they just are trying to do as much as they can, as high intensity as they can, trying to burn the most calories as possible. And again, that's not necessarily what we're trying to do here. We do want to get some sort of adaptation from a cardiovascular fitness standpoint, not just burning more calories, right? So I think that's the other things. We need to change our mindset of focusing on it as like an output thing and like a thing you're trying to do well at and perform well in versus a thing that you're just trying to fatigue yourself and burn as many calories as possible. We want to get away from that mindset. So we do need to have some structure with this, and it's not about just going out and trying to burn as many calories as possible. So the first thing we need to do is we need to learn how to manage our intensity in this. So we can't just go out and do a bunch of HIIT and super intense workouts. You're going to burn out and you're not going to get the adaptations that we're looking for, right? That's going to be more of a fatigue model where you're just accumulating a lot of fatigue and now you're going to burn yourself out. And this is where people say, oh, when I do cardio, I get super hungry. Well, it's because you're just going out and you don't have a game plan with it. You're just ramping up intensity without actually managing that intensity. And that's what's going to lead to you, one, just being under recovered. So now your training is going to get worse over time because we're not actually recovering. We're not managing that intensity and you're going to be hungrier. So you're likely not going to stick to that calorie deficit that you need to lose body fat, right? Like at the end of the day, we can add in more cardio, but if we're not in a deficit, it doesn't matter. And again, this is more true the more cardio you do, right? So if you have one session per week of 30 minutes, you could probably push it relatively hard in that. But if you're doing 2, 3, 4+ sessions a week, that's where we really have to start managing our intensity. And ideally, we are going to be doing more than one session. It does depend on the time that you can commit. So if you're doing like 3 sessions per week, 2 of them, or maybe all 3 should be like lower/medium intensity, more steady state. So we don't want all 3 sessions to be this like, hey, I'm just going to go max out intervals and go as hard as I can every single one and just try to burn as many calories as possible, or just do these like boot camps where again it's just all about calorie output on there, right? We want to manage our intensity. I'm not saying you need to go and do 45 minutes of super low intensity zone 2 type training. We again can be a little bit more intense than that, but we have to manage that intensity. We can't go out and just be at 175 beats per minute for 45 minutes, right? That's where you're going to run into some issues. Maybe these look like sessions where your heart rate is 140 to 150 for 30 minutes, something similar to that. But you shouldn't be going into each session to where your output drops dramatically. That's probably the best way I could put it. So it's okay, you go out for whatever, and by, let's say, the first 10 minutes, you're going max out, and it's like your output is at, I'm just making up numbers here. Let's say on a random thing here, 20, right? That's your output. But then by the end of it, you're at 10 or 5, it's okay. That's not what we're trying to get. Ideally, you would maintain that 20 throughout the entire time, but you're pushing it. Now, if you went down from, say, your output was at 20 to maybe 18, 17, so whatever, that's fine at that point. We just don't want to see these large decreases, because if you are, you're probably on more of the fatigue side of things, and that's going to lead to that burnout type. So even if you do HIIT, let's say you do intervals, you probably want to do, again, same thing. You want to go high output, rest, and then maintain that output throughout those intervals versus super high output, rest, and then now you're at, say, half of the output that you were at before. So when we're looking at, so I like to use the bike. So for me, I'll do 3 sessions a week. One is an interval style, right? So I'm doing like 40 seconds on, 20 seconds rest, 10 rounds, but I'm maintaining my same output, right? Like my speed is the same the entire time. And then I'm resting for, say, 3 to 5 minutes in between. And then I do 10 more rounds of that. Same thing. I want to maintain that speed, right? And then over time, you can figure out what that right speed is to where you're pushing it, but you're not crossing that boundary there. And then I'll have a session that's more quote unquote zone 3. Again, it's going to 20 to 30 minutes at a pace that that again is challenging, but I can maintain the whole time. Again, if I get to the point to where now I'm pushing past that and say 10 minutes in, I have to drop my speed by a good amount. I'm going too hard. I need to decrease that. And then I'll have a session that to me, it's like a dealer's choice session of, hey, maybe I'm going to do 20 to 30 minutes. So again, more zone 3, or maybe I'm just going to go a little bit lighter depending on what my recovery is in that session or what my recovery is around that. Next, we want to adjust our calorie intake. So more cardio and more movement in general will increase how many calories you burn in a day. However, the larger the deficit, the more you'll run into recovery issues and hunger, which typically leads to higher likelihood of overeating calories and erasing the calorie deficit. So we do need to walk that fine line, right? What we don't want to do is just ramp up a bunch of cardio and then really decrease our calories a ton. I would ramp up cardio let's say you're starting a fat loss phase. Again, ideally going into the fat loss phase, we would already be doing some cardio. We're not just doing it during a fat loss phase and doing it throughout the year. So you have a good base there. And then maybe you just drop, say, 500 calories. You do that, and then you see where your weight's trending, you see what your biofeedback is, and then you go from there. Again, for some people, they're going to get in a deficit and things are going to impact them more. So you may have to adjust your calorie intake to that. If you add in a extra session, like during fat loss, say you typically do 3, fat loss, you want to bump it up to 4. Wouldn't necessarily recommend that, but you could potentially do that. Again, you would just want to watch your calorie intake for that. But again, we don't want to just ramp up cardio and then also have a huge decrease in calories at the same time. You need to make sure it matches that, because again, we still want to create a deficit, but when doing more training and cardio, super low calories in combination will backfire mentally and physically. And this is again probably where people get themselves into trouble and say that cardio is not good it's not going to lead to weight loss like people think. Because yes, as you expend more energy, you will naturally be a little bit hungrier. And again, especially the more intense that is. And so you do have to still manage your caloric intake, but we also don't want that deficit to get super large, because that's where you're going to run into some issues, right? And you're going to run the risk of higher likelihood of potentially losing muscle. So we do need to adjust our calorie intake, but at the same time, we still need to create that deficit, right? So you're walking that fine line there. Next, we need to focus on recovery. You need to focus on recovery outside of the gym. So we want to manage overall stress load on your body, plus sleep, plus good nutrition. It's important that we focus on those things outside of the gym in a calorie deficit, because again, if we're not, and we're trying to ramp up our cardio and training, sorry, I'm getting over a cold here. Again, that's where you're going to run into issues. So we need to make sure that we're focusing on recovery. One, so you can continue to push that. You don't run into issues of hunger or just too much stress on the body, but also from, again, the lean body mass perspective. The higher our stress load is, the lower our recovery is. And you're in a deficit, again, performance is going to suffer, and body composition from a lean body mass perspective could also struggle. We still want to get some easy steps in, right? I say quote unquote easy steps. So 6 to 10K per day is still that sweet spot. So you still want to get some movement in, just general movement that isn't necessarily like a training session, right? So I would still get that on top of this. So the cardio is additional to your steps there, because we still want to get some movement in that's like more restorative. Just general movement in general is a good thing to have. And with this kind of lower intensity, really easy type walking, you get the energy expenditure, but it's also again going to help with recovery as well. And then we still want to make sure we lift at least 3 times per week on top of this. And I'm not saying, and we don't want any circuit type stuff either. We're talking in the 5 to 12 rep range, 1 to 3 reps from failure, not this like high intensity, high rep stuff, right? So this isn't the time to go and do 3 boot camp classes on top of your cardio that you're doing. I want your weight training to be geared towards building muscle. So we need to make sure we do that. Again, that's exactly what we focus on in the performance recomp method. Like most people go about their weight training the wrong way, especially in a deficit. So again, we make sure that we're also getting our weight training sessions in. Again, it's a huge mistake I see people make when they come to work with me is their weight training is trying to do too much. It's focused on calorie burn, too high rep type stuff all the time. So how much do we need to do? So I would say as a baseline, 2 sessions per week plus steps is great, right? It's a great baseline. You could do a little bit more if you want, depending on your goals. Is it, hey, I want to continue to improve my cardiovascular system? Do I want to maybe get a little bit extra energy expenditure out of it? Is a combo, then you could do a little bit more. If you want to improve your conditioning plus increase your energy flux, you could go up to 3 to 4 sessions per week on that, in combination with getting your steps. So I would say for most people, 2 to 3 is probably going to be that sweet spot. You could ramp it up a little bit, but obviously the more you go up, the more output you do. So the more training you do, you're going to need to focus more on good nutrition and recovery on top of that. You can't just go in and neglect those things. Like those have to be on track. We have to be on top of those things as well too. So I did get a question on this. So what if your client has no cardio baseline prior to the deficit? Would you build that in before the fat loss phase? Oh, this was a good question. In most situations, there's going to be a phase before fat loss. We're not just going to go straight into a fat loss phase. And so at this point now, for anyone that is a client of mine, you're 30 plus, like we need to be incorporating we need to have a good conditioning base in general. So we would already be doing that, right? So this shouldn't be an issue. But however, if for whatever reason you just decide to do a fat loss phase without building in some cardio before the fat loss phase, I would still recommend some low intensity type work for some conditioning, right? But if you're super out of shape, walking might be enough high intensity for a bit. That might be getting you in that 130, 140 range there. So it does depend, but ideally we've already built in a little bit before that there. But that's a good question. I like it. I think it's very thought-provoking. But again, I think it's important that now at this point, we're always having a base of conditioning in, right? So for any client, like the base needs to be 2 cardio sessions per week, 2 lifting sessions per week. From there, we can build it in terms of, hey, what can they dedicate time to? What is their goal? And what are their limiting factors? If somebody is has super low VO2 max, like super out of shape, then we may ramp up, have a little bit more. If they're like really high body fat, we may ramp up the cardio conditioning side of things and leave weight training closer to two. If somebody has decent VO2 max, decent conditioning, it's a dealer's choice. Probably going to lean more towards adding in a little bit more resistance training, especially if there's someone who's never really had a good base of adding muscle, right? They may think they have because they lift weights or whatever, but they actually haven't really trained in a way that's going to build lean body mass. Maybe we ramp that side of things up. And maybe they're like on the leaner side as well too. Then that would be someone that we're going to be a little bit more focused on lifting weights and doing a little bit more there with that. So that's it for this episode. Hopefully this was helpful. Let me know if you guys have any questions and I'll chat with you next time. Oh, and actually, sorry, before I let you go, if you haven't yet, give me a follow on Instagram, Jeff, HOEHN_. That's where I'm most active on social media. That's where if you have any questions on anything, you can ask me there. And then if you haven't yet, also, please leave a rating and review for this podcast, as that's going to help more people find this podcast as well too. So I appreciate everybody who listens. That's it for now. I'll talk to you guys next time.